Hello and welcome to my second review of Request Month 2013. This is Hydrophobia Prophecy for PC, Xbox 360, and PlayStation 3. This review is coming to you courtesy of Fusion Bunny. He sent me this, so thank you. It is greatly appreciated. This is an action-adventure game that's trying to pass off as horror, but it's really not horror. And it's by Dark Energy Digital. It was released originally in 2010 on Xbox Live Arcade as just plain Hydrophobia. And the updated version of it, the Hydrophobia Pure update, turned it into Hydrophobia Prophecy, which is what you see on PC and PlayStation Network. So, it's an interesting kind of release where the ridiculous polarization of reviews has gone the gamut. A lot of people really liked it, and a lot of people really hated it. And since the update version of it, the Hydrophobia Prophecy, the scores have generally improved. So the question becomes there, how is Hydrophobia Prophecy? I mean, I'm going into it straight as this updated version, so what's it like going into that right off the bat, as opposed to having a frame of reference from Hydrophobia? Well, as far as the presentation goes, the visuals are average for an indie game for Xbox Live Arcade, as far as I'm concerned. But the problem is that I'm playing this on PC, and the graphics engine itself doesn't really do anything to impress me apart from the water physics, which are really this game's main drawing point. It's got incredibly good water physics, to the point where you just have to see it to understand what I'm talking about. The water flows very, very nicely, and it behaves in a much more realistic manner than most water effects that you see. So it's this kind of physics object where it really behaves like a liquid, and it's very cool to experience. But at the same time, that's the only real draw of this game's visuals. The rest of them are just eh. It's kind of got a sci-fi styling to it, but at the same time it doesn't. And there's actually some color in this game, which is quite nice. But at the same time, there's a lot of segments where it's just grays and just kind of dark greenish blue tones. So they might as well be gray anyway. So the visuals don't really impress you all that much apart from those water physics. I mean, you've got clunky animations in a lot of spaces, and there are quite a few graphical glitches in this game that you just notice right off the bat. And generally they're not a big problem, but it's just these glitches kind of wear on you after a while. That's not mentioning the kind of wonky FOV setting in this game. I'm not really sure what it's set to, but it seems really narrow to be able to do the things that you're doing. So that's just something to keep in mind. But then there's the sound design. The sound effects themselves are very wimpy. They don't really convey anything very realistically. The sounds that are trying to be this kind of horror-y sound don't really work out all that well. The voice acting is outright terrible, to the point where it's not even really laughable. It just grates on your nerves after a while. I'm not really sure what kind of accent the character you're playing as, Kate, is supposed to have. It just, I don't know what it's going for. It sounds terrible. And the rest of the characters in this game have ridiculous accents as well. They deliver their lines with incredibly high amounts of cheesiness. It's terrible voice acting. And then you've got music, which is just average at best. So it doesn't really grab you, and it doesn't really stand out at all. It's just there, and you notice it occasionally, but other than that. And there's also sound glitches as well. I had the sound kind of cut out on me a few bits and pieces here and there, so that was just annoying when I would be firing my gun, for instance, and it wouldn't actually sound like I was firing my gun, and then suddenly I would actually hear the sound pop in. It was all over the place. So there's a lot of glitches with the presentation that really kind of wear on you, but overall it's a fairly average thing, apart from the voice acting, which is terrible, and the general frame rate of this game, which goes wildly all over the place. But what really matters, the story and the gameplay. And the story in this is that you play as Kate Wilson, a systems engineer aboard the ship Queen of the World, which is this humongous luxury ocean liner that ends up coming under attack by a fanatical group called the Malthusians, who are just complete psychopaths who believe that the only way to save humanity from the rapid population growth that will eventually outpace everything is to wipe out humanity. I'm not joking. That's literally their entire motivation. To wipe out humanity, to save it from itself. Wow. These guys are stupid and crazy. And the entire time you're playing, they're just spouting off ridiculous things, and you just sit there and go, whatever. This is dumb. So that's pretty much the entirety of the storyline right there. You're basically trying to get off the ocean liner at first, and then you uncover their plot, and you're trying to stop it. The entire time you're going around, you're being basically led around by a guy named Scoot, who is extremely annoying. He just pops in over your communications, and he just babbles on, gives you vague objectives, and makes random quips, and it gets kind of annoying, actually. And it's rather amusing, because in Act 3, he disappears completely. So, yeah, you never hear from him again. And the plot itself ends very, very abruptly. As in, you have the final boss fight, and then game over. It has a very brief segment of showing Kate kind of stumbling away from this thing, and then game over. That's it. There's no... The story does not resolve. And you sit there going, wait, what just happened? So the story makes the game feel pretty incomplete. But what about the gameplay? Well, the gameplay is kind of all over the place. On the one hand, you have Act 1, which is basically a platformer, really, because you're not really doing any combat. Combat becomes a much bigger thing in Acts 2 and 3. And all told, the majority of this game is spent jumping on things, or moving along things, or swimming. That's it. And so you've got these kind of interesting ideas where they tried to combine these things, and they didn't really do a very good job of it. I mean, on the one hand, you have platforming mechanics that seem clunky and slow. When you're moving along different things, you just seem like you don't really have as much control as you really want. And so it doesn't really feel very natural. You're just kind of clumsily working your way through this game. The camera really doesn't help either, because it kind of swings all over the place really quickly, and it may just be a PC problem, but seriously, the issues with this particular camera make it very hard to figure out what you're actually supposed to do, because you're trying to move your camera nice and smoothly, and you can't. It just goes all over the place. And so that becomes a pretty big problem, particularly when you're in high-intensity situations involving combat, and suddenly you're getting a bit nauseous from having to swing the camera around so much. And on top of that, the FOV for this game is pretty low, so you're going to have a pretty big problem with that if you have issues with low FOVs, giving you headaches and stuff like that. And that combined with this fast camera movement makes it almost nauseating to play. So don't play it for very long periods of time if you suffer from that sort of thing. And so the camera makes it hard to do all this platforming and such, as well as actually figure out what you're supposed to do and where you're supposed to go. There is a lot of sameness to the environments, and it's pretty hard to figure out where you're supposed to go, even though this game's actually really linear. Believe it or not, there are quite a few segments where I got stuck for a time and was just sitting there going, what do I do? Where do I go? Now, ultimately, I figured out how to get through it, but still, it was confusing and awkward to figure out where I was supposed to go, even though it was usually some very small problem that I had, and I just didn't notice it earlier, and I would just stumble around that area for quite a long time trying to figure out where I'm supposed to go. And that becomes a pretty big problem when you have, say, an entire area of just having to swim. So guess what? You drown, or you run into enemies and they mow you down, or stuff like that. It gets really annoying. And eventually, once you've figured all that sort of thing out, and you figure out where you're supposed to go, that's not that big of a deal. But at the same time, you still have to contend with the very clunky mechanics of this game. It's got a really nasty habit of when you go up to interact with an object, you have to be positioned pretty much exactly right, otherwise it's not going to actually interact with that object. And on top of that, you've got guys shooting at you, you've got, say, electrical things going all over the place. It's a mess. And so when you've got those elements blending together to get in your way while you're trying to do simple puzzles like matching wavelengths and put barrels in things to lift them up in the water, and that's pretty much all the puzzles are in this game, I might add. It's kind of tedious. Now, mercifully, this game isn't very long. It's about 4 hours. And, yeah, 4 hours. But it culminates in a boss fight that's pretty anticlimactic, and the ending, of course, renders it just completely stupid. But the gameplay itself is the real problem here. You've got that platforming element that's just a bit clunky. You've got that camera that's going all over the place. You've got gunplay that's really unsatisfying. I mean, you do have different types of ammo for your pistol, but you're still just using a pistol. And you get infinite ammo for your sonic rounds, but you don't get infinite ammo for your semi-auto, your explosive gel, your energy rounds, which you get very late in the game, rapid fire, which you also get late in the game. And the enemies just are kind of overpowered because they've got shotguns, they've got assault rifles, you've got a pistol. So good luck. And it also gives you these water powers really, really late in the game. And it gets annoying when you have something like that. The water powers show up really late in the game, so you never get to see the full potential of them. And they're just used for some rudimentary puzzles and basically the final boss fight, and that's it. And that's really cool, actually, the being able to manipulate the water and send things flying with it, or just build this water tower, and all sorts of different things that you can do with it, even though it's a very simple mechanic where just you pull up the water tower, you might be able to lift something and then throw it. It's still cool to fiddle around with, but you don't get to use it very long. You basically get that in the last 20 minutes of the game. Yeah, that's kind of depressing. So the rest of that game, you're either doing platforming or you're just sitting there shooting at things, and the shooting mechanics are very unsatisfying. So you've got all these different elements blending together to make the game just not that enjoyable from a gameplay standpoint. And then it tries to pass off as horror, and it fails miserably. The atmosphere in this game is almost comical rather than actually just this great thing of horror. In fact, you sit there and you go, this is dumb half the time. You don't even get any sense of the supposed hydrophobia this game is supposed to give you. And so it's a failure on pretty much all counts. It's buggy. It doesn't run very well. It's got gameplay mechanics that are clunky at best, and at their worst, they're pretty much unusable. It's got that frame rate problem with in regards to it not running well, getting in the way of you actually being able to play. In a lot of places, it's pretty confusing as to what you need to do to get to the next area, even though it's a very simple game. It's extremely linear. It's short. It's got terrible voice acting. It's got a dumb storyline with dumb enemies and just annoying characters all around. And ultimately, it saps all possible joy out of this game just to play it. So ultimately, I have to say, avoid this game. I give it a 1 out of 5. Thanks for watching.